Welcome to our Japanese-style living environment webinar series. We will soon be in conversation with Bill Castellon about applying the Japanese aesthetic of home and garden living environment in a way authentic to our own region and cultures. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to extend a special thanks to our partners who make this programming possible. The Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership and to the Oakland Fukuoka Sister City Association. My name is Peter Boyer, your moderator. I'm pleased to introduce Bill Castellon. Bill will show and tell how to design and build a garden celebrating anywhere by employing the aesthetics and methods developed in Japan. Bill is a licensed landscape contractor out of Oakland, California, USA. He and his crew build Japanese-style gardens and other regional naturalistic gardens. Placing rocks is their specialty. Bill has other specialties in pruning and bonsai. He's quite accomplished. Bill learned garden building with Mas Imasumi and pruning with Dennis Makashima. He also spent a month at Kinkakuji as the guest of Tokoshiro Tamane, the head gardener there. Bill has made presentations for the International Symposium of Japanese Gardens, North American Japanese Garden Association, and contributes regularly to Sakia Living magazine. His company has built a number of gardens in the United States with the JDA Suirakuen, Suirakuen, Suirakuen crew from Japan. His broad interdisciplinary experience in fostering and rehabilitating such gardens, his familiarity with the integrated living environment developed in Japan, both inform his garden building. Bill is also active in the East Bay Bonsai Society, eastbaybonsai.org, as a master teacher for the Merit College Bonsai and Aesthetic Pruning Clubs, aestheticpruning.org, in the Aesthetic Pruners Association, aestheticprunersassociation.org, and the North American Japanese Garden Association. Mercifully brief at najga.org, N-A-J-G-A. Let's hear it.
Hi, everybody. This day has been one of the most challenging days of my career so far. Anyway, the picture you're seeing is me at the Philadelphia Flower Show sometime in the late 50s, probably, or early 60s. My father used to help nurserymen friends of his set up the flower show in Philadelphia. And this picture was actually in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm not actually asleep. It was posed, believe it or not. Anywho, you know the secret now. So, I'm a landscape contractor. I've been a landscaper my whole life. I was always very drawn to the Japanese aesthetic. And before I go much further, I would just like to say that we're talking here about the Japanese garden, which is an art form that has developed over more than 1,000 years. So I don't take this lightly, what I'm doing or what I'm talking about. It's been built, as I say, it's been an art form that's been perfected and refined to such a high level over a 1,000-year period. So I always feel that I'm a student and I'm always learning, and there's always so much more. I know what I do people like, but I know there's so much more out there and so much more to learn and such a higher level of aesthetic beauty to achieve. So that's my goal. And as Peter was pointing out, I grew up outside of Philadelphia in a semi-rural area. After the war, people were buying pieces of property from larger estates. My father had a little 4-acre place. He was an amateur nurseryman and landscaper. He actually worked for General Electric, but he did his landscaping and nursery work on the weekend. We had a small greenhouse, and I was always really liked that, but I never saw it as a future, really. My future was just running around in the woods, basically. But besides the woods, I was constantly being indoctrinated by these Western garden principles, you know, the lawns, the manicured hedges. We had an acre of lawn, which I spent many, many hours trying to plow through every week, that kind of thing. But as soon as we got done with the lawn and got permission, we were off in the woods. And that's where we spent most of our time. But you never made the connection between that beauty and that place that you loved being connected to the home. So anyway, so this flower show, I said, was a matter of my father and his friends. He would help one of his nurseryman friends set up their display every year. And at the Philadelphia Flower Show, the main thing I can remember is those tulips that you see in the picture. Whenever I smell tulips, it takes me back to that place, because the whole thing would be filled with tulips. I don't care what else was going on in the garden. In the spring, back east, it was tulips everywhere. You can't beat tulips, I'll tell you. So when we got done with all our pruning the hedges and doing the lawn, we would go in the woods. And luckily, we lived in this area where we didn't have to even cross the street to go into big woods and play along the creek and so forth. We'd actually be in the woods making dams in the creek, taking natural material, sticks and so forth, and making little huts and weaving little fences. And it's just so funny that that was all going on. It was always in you, but we had no guidance. And anything we kind of saw of Japan was always sort of not the real deal. And you never saw really good examples of Japanese gardens, especially if it was anything at that time back east for the most part. There are exceptions, but you didn't really get to see good examples of what we will be talking about. So here we are in the woods doing all these things, playing and observing nature. Then I saw bonsai at a show. My father took us to a garden show that was at Temple University, which is outside of Philadelphia. Temple has a campus in Ambler, Pennsylvania that has a horticulture department. And so we went to the show and there were some bonsai and it just blew my mind. It was one of those things that you just, you see and you never forget, and it has a profound effect on you. And I'm assuming that being in Pennsylvania, probably in the early 60s, they weren't the greatest bonsai ever, considering what we get to see in America. But that has improved massively over the last 20 years, and I can talk about that more too. But anyway, I was so moved by it, and my father, even as a nurseryman, thought it was all smoke and mirrors and nothing to, you know, get into. So, you know, that was always in the back of my mind. Then, in National Geographic, I saw a picture of Saihoji, which, let's see, oh, I actually have it here. I saw this picture and again, it just blew my mind. It was like, this is a garden. This is where I want to live. It's always where I wanted to be. And it kind of reminded me of, if you've ever seen the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where Richard Dreyfuss is tearing out his shrubbery and building a building Devil's Tower on his dining room table. And then he looks over at the TV and sees Devil's Tower on the TV because of all the alien stuff that's going on, and then he knows what's up. Well, that was kind of how it was for me. All of a sudden, oh yeah, this is it. This is what's going on. But anyway, that too was kind of lost in my, my training and what I've known and what I was familiar with. Like, how do you approach that? How do you make that? How do you fit this into a living environment? I didn't understand it at all. And being a landscaper, like I said, I've always been a landscaper, but I did not know how to approach this aesthetic at all. I would go to our local rock yard and just long to work with these rocks, but I could not picture how to put things together. And I don't like things that don't look good together. And I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't know how to make that work. Then one day I'm looking in the newspaper and I see a meeting of the East Bay Bonsai Society's meeting in Oakland, just 10 minutes from my house. I was like, wow, I always wanted to do bonsai. Maybe I'll just go down and check this meeting out. And I go down, and you ever hear that phrase, the first day of the rest of your life? This was the day. Dennis Makashima, who is my mentor, my main mentor through all of this, was giving a talk. And he had just returned from Japan. I think if you were one of Peter's webinars several months ago, maybe, was Kathy Shaner. Dennis and Kathy Shaner were both sent to Japan to study with Mr. Mitsuya, who's a bonsai master in Japan. And Dennis had come back and was giving this program at the East Bay Bonsai Society. Dennis had pine branches and maple branches all over the table, stacks of photographs, all kinds of stuff. The meeting went on till 11 o'clock at night. It's still the longest meeting East Bay Bonsai has ever had, and nobody left. And one guy was yelling, it's supposed to end at 10, but nobody paid attention. And I was totally hooked. Okay, I'm not kidding. This was like a profound experience for me. Anyway, so through meeting Dennis, I became active in Murray College and those activities. I literally, after that meeting, had spent every weekend for several years doing volunteer projects at public gardens. Dennis had clients that we would go to who had, American style Japanese gardens with pines and maples. Some of the gardens had too many pines to even believe, but we got to go back year after year and work on these. Then we have our garden at Lake Merritt in Oakland. Here's Dennis now. He should be coming on your screen, doing what he does best, messing with pine trees. Is it up there, Peter?
Yeah.
Okay. That's our little garden at Lake Merritt in Oakland, which was the original project that we had with East Bay, or with the Merritt College Pruning Club. Frank Ogawa, who was a city councilman in Oakland, personally asked Dennis to be responsible for the garden. And we have maintained that garden ever since. Dick Austin, my friend Dick Austin, my friend and mentor, and yeah, he's my man. Anyway, Dick and me have sort of taken over the responsibility after Dennis backed out of that. And so we continue to this day. And like I said, it is a very nice Japanese garden in Oakland. It had been built in the 60s by Japanese Americans. Here's another picture of Dennis. This was actually a Toshimoto's, who was a famous old nurseryman and a Japanese American. And these were old 70-year-old black pines at the time that were kind of in decline, that had been in the nursery because it had been kind of run down. And we would go there, and we spent a couple years renovating them. Here's another picture. This is Michael Gallagher on the right, and Randall Lee, who you'll hear from next week, in the middle there, and Boone. I can't pronounce Boone's last name, so I won't even attempt it. And another,
repot.
there you go. Peter will do that. And then Rick Wheeler, another person from the Merritt Group many, many years ago. Boone now is an internationally known bonsai artist and quite gifted. So we had a lot of interesting people that came from that experience. But this was just one of those projects. And for me, seeing these pines in these boxes at that time was just incredible, these big, fantastic things. And we got to work on them. And over the years from doing the work we did, they improved. So the Merritt had too many projects for me to even mention. Plus, we eventually got into the aesthetic pruning series that you have heard of now that Merritt has. And I teach several of those classes, as well as placing rocks in the landscape class, where we actually have a lecture on the aesthetics of placing rocks in the morning. And then we actually place rocks on campus in the afternoon to see how to use equipment and how to put things together. And you'll see more about equipment and so forth as we go along. So Dennis, Dennis, besides all this stuff through Merritt that we did, just has such a great sense. This next picture is our garden in Oakland that we have been maintaining for all those years. And as you can see, there's lots of pines, there's lots of material, and people get to work on them. I learned everything I know by going to these events year after year and working on the same tree. The pines you have to work on, well, everything you have to work on. That's so important. You have to try to find somewhere where you can actually work on the material. We are unbelievably lucky in the Bay Area. We have so much of an influence from the Japanese American community, whether it be bonsai or garden building. We have really great people. We have great gardens. So there's such opportunity to learn here. I mean, besides all the luck I've had meeting certain people and so forth, I was also in the right place to learn this. It's all around you all the time. So yes, so I got a little distracted there.
Hey,
But anyway,
Bill, would,
yes.
would you like to describe the larger setting here of Kohanen, like the room and the?
Yes, when this picture that you're looking at, the garden is set up as a view garden, which we could talk about later. But what that means is the garden center in Oakland, where all the bonsai events and all garden show events are, is looking into this. And the garden room in the garden center, you can take in the whole garden as you sit in that room, which is beautiful. It just sort of wraps around you. This waterfall that's in the center and the pathway are kind of centered. The waterfall is the focal point of the garden. And we'll talk more about design aspects later. But basically everything in the garden directs your eye back toward the center to that waterfall. So it's easy to take it all in, and it's pleasing to the eye to move through the garden. This is one of the best gardens I've seen outside of Japan, especially the rock work and so forth. It's just fantastic. So anybody comes to Oakland, I'd be glad to show you the garden. So yes, Dennis just had a profound effect on my life as well as many other people here. And like I said, he gave you the opportunity to go as far as you want with this, this aesthetic. Then, let's see what else we have here. There he is. This was just last year at a bonsai show before everything got shut down, doing his thing with his little black pines that he grew himself. And this is another Merritt project. These are the Buddhist temple in Alameda. They had these 7 great black pines that were around this old pond. The pond has failed and is dilapidated, unfortunately, but the pines have improved greatly over the last few years that we've worked on them as a group. And I lead the pine pruning group here. Notice the giant Victorian Buddhist temple behind the pine trees, which is quite interesting. Anyway, that's another one of our projects. And Dennis is the reason why all of that is happening. All this pruning, all these volunteer projects is all from him. So then, through getting involved with Dennis and doing bonsai and becoming an active member of East Bay Bonsai Society, I met Masi Mizumi, who you see here in this picture. the guy with the short guy with the big smile on his face. He, when he retired as a garden builder in Oakland, he was one of the great Japanese garden builders in the Bay Area. And when he had retired many years ago, he just did bonsai. He became, he was a bonsai master. He would travel and teach bonsai. He used to write the What to Do monthly article for the Italian Bonsai Society magazine. He traveled internationally. So that's all he did. And people were regularly asking him to build gardens for them. So through bonsai workshops and so forth, I got to know Mas. And one time I had been maintaining a garden that he had done some of the work in many years ago. So I took him over there we went together so that he could look at the garden and critique it and talk to me about what I was doing and so forth. And I happened to show him a picture of some rocks I had placed. It was up in the burn zone when we had the big fire in Oakland and my clients lost their house. And in the remodeling, the grading had exposed all these large boulders that we set on the property. She was convinced I could do it. So I did the best I could without any knowledge of what I was doing, to be honest. And I showed Mas a picture of a boulder we placed, and it was kind of textbook. It was asymmetric triangle set in the ground just right. So it looked good. And he looked at the picture and said, next time you do that, get me to help you. And boy, oh boy. So it was like getting struck by lightning twice. It's just too good to be true. So we ended up building 10 gardens together before he passed away. The first time we built a garden, he was 83. These pictures are of the bonsai collection garden at Lake Merritt. It was designed by a landscape architect, but if you realize Japanese gardens, Mas wasn't about to follow anybody's plans. And so they just gave him carte blanche to do the dry waterfall and dry stream system and other rocks that were placed in the garden. So this is a picture of us setting up the main waterfall. And you'll notice, I'll talk about it later, but that large standing stone is the main focal stone in the waterfall arrangement, and that is the first stone to be placed. So, and all these people you see are volunteers. In fact, the one on the closest to you in the lower right is Dennis Makishima. Leslie Buck is holding the other leg. Rich Huss, who was an old, really great pruner, a member of our group years ago, is on the other leg there, and that's my sister up under the trees there. So these were all Merritt people. And I can tell you for sure that this garden wouldn't have been built without the Merritt people. I need to find a few more slides here. It won't let me show them all at the same time. So anyway, we had quite a few people who would help with this project. I'll show you some more examples of what I'm talking about. Okay, are they showing, Peter?
A bit of a time lag.
There we go. How's that?
Yeah, now we're at the bonsai garden.
Yeah, now here's Mas. This was after the waterfall was done and planted. You see him up there on that ladder? Peter here, who's my guy here, who teaches ladder safety. I was showing him this picture of Mas up on that little step ladder. It's not even an orchard ladder. It kind of makes him nervous. But here's a good picture of what it was like doing this. These were all volunteers, mostly from Merritt. There's a few bonsai people thrown in, but we had as many as 30 people at a time. The rock work went great. We had people set up rolling boulders into the scene. Mas had a group setting stones. It was almost happening too fast for him to set them up as they came. It was just a fantastic event. And here he is. This is his gate that was built. And I apologize. the man who does joinery carpentry, he lives in Santa Rosa, and I don't remember his name, but he built this gate, and the gate was dedicated to Moss. We raised funds to dedicate this gate to Moss. And there's Moss with his dry waterfall arrangement, and the rest of the dry stream kind of wraps through the garden. And this was one of our biggest projects together. We did a bunch of residential work together. And it's common in the Japanese tradition, nobody's telling you anything. We're just working together. And I would work with him and I would see, the first stone goes in, the next stone, and then everything expands out from there. And you just see how they relate and how they drop in together. It's always been better for me to work and do stuff and see it as it happens than it is to read about it or study it. So that's the other thing, like with pruning, you have to be hands-on, I'm afraid. And that's a big challenge for some people, to be able to put themselves in that position to do these hands-on type things. The rock thing, you can buy yourself a few rocks, and if you have a little spot of land, you can just start setting them up in your backyard and playing around. But that's the other thing, I get hired to practice in people's yards. That's how I always feel. Oh, great, they hired me, I can practice some more. That's kind of how it has to happen, believe it or not. We don't get to have this Japanese apprenticeship where we work for 5 years or more with a company and learn everything we know and then go out on our own. We have to kind of do our own thing. But luckily we have people like this who can help us. So, and I've come to realize there's big differences between how Japanese Americans would build gardens and the way they put things together and the way the Japanese do. The main example of that is my mentor Moss liked to use a lot of colorful plants in his arrangements. You can see in this garden, there was always a blue atlas cedar, like behind the waterfall, or like a golden hinoki would be in the arrangement, or red maples, or he'd like to do a lot of that color. And I found with Japanese professionals, that doesn't happen. It's green. The people that I've worked with, everything's green. There's no variegation, there's no colorful plants. And I am totally into that. So we'll talk more about that later. So that's one profound difference. So as all this is going on, I started teaching at Murray College. I got certified to teach these aesthetic pruning classes. I teach pruning the Japanese garden, pruning pines, pruning container trees and shrubs, and there's something else. Oh, introduction to bonsai. How could I forget? And that's actually an all-day class too, where we have a lecture in the morning and then we prune trees in the afternoon. Or we actually make a little tree. You bring in like a little gallon juniper or something, and we make it into a bonsai. And other friends like Randall Lee, who you'll meet next week, will come and help me do that. So that's always been a fun experience. And of course, not everybody's going to want to do that. Not everybody's going to want to do bonsai and all, but these are really good ways to help you understand the aesthetic, because it's all the same. When I describe planting trees later, I describe it as how we would do a forest planting in bonsai, because all these aesthetics relate to one another. Bonsai and tree pruning are completely different, but the way the arrangements and all and branch placements and things of these nature are very similar. So it's really nice to get fully engulfed in the aesthetic. Like Suiseki, I'm also a member of the local Suiseki club, the viewing stones, which is a Japanese art form, which is very different than Chinese viewing stones. So they're more natural, like the Japanese garden is, a more of a natural looking stone that represents a natural formation in nature. So anyway, I started teaching and at Murray and doing the pruning, the volunteer pruning projects. I've done several of the programs at the Friendship Garden in Balboa Park in San Diego, a few pruning and rock placement seminars. I also, several years ago, I did with Dick Austin again, we did a garden for the San Francisco Garden Show, which was a Japanese garden using native plants. And that kind of brings us towards that thing of making the garden our own. You know, not using, I mean, the garden we built there, the rock work is all totally Japanese style rock work. But we had a big cut live oak that had a lot of character. We used alders, and we had some redwoods as backdrops, and garrya, and different types of native California plants that we would see here. And of course, the rock is native. The rock that we use is called moss rock, that you'll see pictures of, that actually comes from just in the Central Valley here. And they go beautifully with the oaks and with this natural material that we like to use for our own types of gardens. Because remember, in Japan, even though we might think of the gardens as exotic, it's all native plant material for them. It's all locally, it's like if you go in the woods across the street, it's the same woods, the plants that are in the garden. And there are no fancy plants. There's green Acer palmatum, there's red pines, black pines, very little variegation or colorful plants. It's all stuff that would be right in the woods across the street. So keep that in mind as we make it our own, using our own or whatever it is. So through all this, oh, the San Francisco Garden Show. Yeah, so we made this native garden. And, oh, that one has to wait. So we make this native garden of, for the garden show, which was quite an experience. I love the garden. I don't have a picture of it because it was so hard to take a picture in the Cow Palace. But it was in the Cow Palace in San Francisco, and our garden was actually up in the bleachers and then over the wall and down onto the floor. So we had an upper dry stream spilling in a big waterfall down onto the floor to a dry pond, and made our garden all around it. And it was quite an experience. And again, because of our Merritt connection, the Merritt people helped us build this garden. We had quite a few people that came in, because you have to do the whole thing in 3 days. And so we had it was quite an experience. And we ended up, okay, another important thing is, so it's native plants, it's Japanese style rock work with native plant material, but with no ornaments, no lanterns, no water basin, none of that. It's very natural looking. We had thousands of people talk to us. Nobody looked at it as a Japanese garden. They just see it as a natural garden. Nobody even thought about that. But we got no work from it. It was more work than I've ever had to put into anything to get no work from. I'm glad I did it, but the real payoff, and I have to throw this in, was on Sunday morning before it opened. I got to meet Bonnie Raitt. Bonnie Raitt's tour manager had some capacity with the garden show and brought her in before it opened. And so here's this person I've admired all my life since I was a teenager, walks up to me and says, "Your garden is magnificent. It's beautiful. It's like a painting. It's like a work of art." And I'm looking at her like, this is amazing. It turns out she lives in Marin and has a Japanese style garden. I believe John Nishizawa did that, who is a member of our bonsai club. And she talked about how she actually went to pick the rocks out up in the Yuba River. And so it was really neat. It was really a great experience. But yes, so, and everybody loves the gardens. So through all these other experiences, like working at the collection or at Balboa Park, I was at a seminar one time, and myself and my friend Dick Austin, who I mentioned earlier, had wanted to go to Japan and do something, you know, like get involved in something. And we thought about Mark Keane had that class where foreigners would go and study gardens and so forth. But while we were there, Mr. Tomine from the Golden Pavilion, the head gardener of the Golden Pavilion, was there doing rock setting and tree pruning demonstrations. And Dick said, why don't we ask him if we could go work with his crew? So, oh, yeah, why not? And so we had our friend Saccio ask him if that would be okay. And he asked everybody involved around the seminar whether they mind if they did that. And they said, yeah, come on over. So he literally said, yeah, come on over. And then we never heard from him. And we'd send him things and you never heard from him. So it was almost a year, and Dick goes to Japan on a different tour and went to visit him. And the first thing he says is, where were you guys? Because obviously when the Japanese say, yes, come, that's what they mean. So it wasn't a lot of planning to be done. So anyway, we ended up at Kinkakuji. I thought I had a picture here, but let's see what happens. We spent a month in 2001, myself and Dick Austin, and we just happened to be there in 2001 during 9/11, which made it very exciting. And but what an experience. I mean, excuse me for 1 second. I'm trying to pick out a few more pictures here. This thing won't let me show the pictures all at once. Maybe I don't even have that picture. No, I thought I had a picture of us at Kinkakuji, but I do not. Anyway, we spent a month, and basically we did maintenance at Kinkakuji. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep these pictures in order, but I am not, so just bear with me here for 1 second. Okay. I'm sorry, folks. This has been very difficult, this whole situation. Okay, so let's see here. Anyway, let me continue before I try to get these pictures together. Anyway, so we spent that month there, and basically we did general maintenance at Kinkakuji. We also worked for some private clients, as well as a bunch of related temples in the same sect as Kinkakuji. And so we got all over Kyoto. We got to see all kinds of gardens that you wouldn't necessarily see, and parts of gardens that you wouldn't see because we were in there doing maintenance. And the most, what's that?
And we've lost your slides.
I know.
Or are you still
I'm trying to play with them.
Okay.
Just give me a minute. I'll bring some more up in a minute.
Okay.
I'm sorry, these pictures are kind of driving me crazy. Sometimes I have them and sometimes I don't. But anyway, so yes, that was quite an experience. But what I'm trying to get to is the beauty of it was we realized how we fit into the situation, having been trained by Dennis and Moss, that we knew what was going on, even though we're way behind in the aesthetics. We still knew what was going on as far as the pruning, the maintenance, rocks, all that kind of thing. You did feel, or I at least felt like I fit in, like I could do this. That maybe if I was way younger, I could have been an apprentice and I could have really, benefited from that experience. So anyway, it was quite an experience just to be there and be in that situation. Plus, Mr. Tamane's hospitality is beyond belief. Like the places we ate, the things we did were just unbelievable. I can never imagine being treated like that again. Just amazing human being and just a force of nature. And I find there's a consistency with all these people that when we work together, we're really all on the same page somehow, which is really neat. So I could go on and on about all of that because we spent like I said, we spent the whole month there. We were there during 9/11, which was quite exciting, but it still didn't take away from the great experience we had working there. Okay. Then Okay. So in Concouragee, the main thing was learning that, we can do this stuff. We're like these people. We all are thinking the same way. Even with the language, we didn't know what was going on. The apprentice who was supposed to be able to speak English could speak barely any English. We could barely ever understand what was going on. And Dick spoke a little bit of Japanese. I was real impressed with Dick's Japanese in the United States, but when we got to Japan, I wasn't so impressed. But anyway, it was very helpful, and hilarious too. Like when an apprentice is speaking to Dick and he's trying to understand what the guy's saying, and I'm there, Dick, he's speaking English. He's trying to speak English, not Japanese. It was just a constant comedy show. But we were all on the same page. You don't have to talk a lot. We know kind of what's going on. You know what I mean? That's what I'm getting at. Anyway, since that time, I've been constantly trying to improve my skills. And my friend Avram Dalton, who's a good friend of Fred Miyahara, who's one of my old buddies, an old bonsai buddy, Avram worked at the Friendship Garden in San Diego and then went to Japan and spent 3.5 years as an apprentice and got the full apprenticeship experience, like the old school experience. So Avram is quite accomplished as a garden builder. He's helped me with things, and we ended up building several gardens together with this crew that he put together. It's the JDA group, the Sirakuren group. I'm sorry with my Japanese pronunciations, but that was Avram and Eto-san, Shigematsu, and Toshi. Toshi and Eto-san. Toshi is Eto-san's son, and Shige is one of their guys, and Avram. So we were renovating a garden in San Mateo, Hillsborough with Ron Herman. And part of the deal, we were taking the pond apart and putting everything back together and adding to the garden. It was an old garden that I'll talk about and show you pictures later. But part of it was up near the entry to the garden, there would be walls built, and then there would be a path going into the main garden through the woods from where you would enter the property. So I had agreed to build the walls at the entry. Then Avram told me about these fellas he's working with, and I told the client, look, I could do the walls, or you can have an incredible opportunity to have these men come and do this for you. So that was the plan, and we agreed on that. And so Eto-san, Toshi, and Avram, and Shige came to the job, and first they did the walls, temple style walls. What you're looking at here is the path from the entry into the garden. Let me find Here's some of the walls. Do you see that? These are the temple style walls they built at the entry to the garden. Are they showing, Peter? Okay. So this was the first thing they did. This is Napa basalt stone that is locally available. And then these pathways I'm showing you now. This is the pathway going into the garden. We actually were across the street renovating another property that was the same scale as this, a very large lake and a very old Japanese garden. So I was over there working and I had seen the walls already. So I came over to see how they were doing on the pathways. And you can see right that little bridge that's in this picture, we did everything beyond that into the garden, which you'll see later, and they built these paths. So I came in through the back way from the neighbors, came across and saw this work and was just like, oh my God. My teacher, Moss, at a time like this would say, no Caucasian did that. That was my thinking at that moment. But there was a Caucasian involved, and that would be Avram Dalton. Anyway, I was just stunned. Look at this. Isn't this magnificent? The whole layout, the whole way the whole thing moves through the garden. This garden was actually on the Najka, it was a regional tour in 2017. There were 3 gardens, this garden, and Ron Herman spoke about the renovation of this garden, and then there were several other gardens right there in that neighborhood. And none of this work was done at that point. So hopefully we can have another garden tour at a later date to see the temple walls, this entry garden, and what we've actually totally finished the other side now as well, which wasn't completely done at that time, I don't think, but you'll see pictures of it in the near future. This whole property is still being finished. We're actually renovating a second lake in this property right now. So it is getting there. Plus on this, we've been working with Greg Reeves Design, who took over for Paul Disco basically, and took over Paul's shop and so forth, and they're doing extensive work on this property, the interior of the home, as well as all the fences. You'll see some of the fences that were built later. So it's really wonderful to have this whole little group of people who can do all these things, because I can't do all these things. My main things are the trees and the stones, and then I need help with other things like bamboo fences and things of that sort. But there's people to do that, and we all learn from each other. So let me see what else I have here. Yeah. So that's that garden. Then we got to, after doing the stuff down there, again, I had clients who were in Mill Valley who wanted a Japanese style garden. And again, I went to them and said, look, I can do all this, but we have the opportunity to get these people, these professionals in here to work on your property. And they agreed to do it. So, and one of my favorite parts of all this is how these guys never have plans. There's no plans. And we're talking to these clients, but I don't either for the most part. I rely on people going to see past clients and discussing the whole process and seeing how it works. I make some rough sketches, we discuss it, we look at other plans, we look at pictures, and we decide what we're going to do. And it works out beautifully. We never have any problems. So these guys come in and we're talking to the 2 clients, Brent and Wade, and Toshi and Avram got Brent over there in the corner, and I can hear him. I'm talking to Wade and I can hear him saying, oh yeah, and Brent's like, but don't we need some plans? Oh no, you just tell us, go ahead, we'll start right away and build the garden. And I'm getting a little concerned, and I say to Wade, you know, this is kind of how these guys do it. And he just puts his hand on my shoulder and says, look, Bill, we've talked to enough of your clients to know how this works. So that was really great. So of course, that is how it worked. So this is the rocks. This is some of the rocks. And here's Toshi with this again is the main rock that will be the base of the dry waterfall. And so everything will go from there. You can see the piece of equipment off to the side is a spider crane that was able to be gotten into the backyard, which it's like a transformer. I don't think I have a better picture of it, but it's a small unit that's only like 2 feet wide and 4 feet long. And it's all compacted together. And when you come into a space, it expands out. And we could use it to place the boulders, but we still needed to use the tripod, which is kind of my specialty, for places that it couldn't get the rocks that far from where they were. So we'd have to use the tripod as well. And we use the tripod to get everything into the backyard. And I'll be talking about that later. Anyway, so this wall, as I said, we had no plans. This was one of the first things that Eto-san started. And I would dream of walls like this. When I'd go to Japan, I would look at walls like this and say, I want to build walls like this. So here I am with this right in front of me, boom. This whole section was just like, boom, gone, done. He would just boom, boom, boom. The thing I love about the technique is they just start and they just go. It's just amazing, the whole process. So let's see what else. Here's, this is Greg Kitajima, who is a member of the Aesthetic Pruning Club and a good friend, and Asher Brown, who was also a garden apprentice in Japan and did the real apprenticeship. He's from back east, and we had him come and help with the project. Avram got him out here to help with the project. And they also did a project recently in Woodside where he came out to help. And it's just wonderful having all these people who work together. Asher also writes for Zukia Living as well. Here's Eto-san. He decided that they didn't want a lantern in the garden, and then they decided they did want a lantern. So we're eating lunch, and he goes, oh, we're just going to make a lantern out of these rocks that are sitting here. So this is the base of it. The only thing we didn't have was the top, which we had to get a little later. And here's our crew of everybody. These are my guys on the left, and Eto-san and the boys on the right. Avram's here. You can see his hands there, but that's him. And so it was just wonderful working together, this cross-cultural thing. This is Eto-san teaching Liko to use chopsticks, which was fun. And my guy Liko here has just become such an artist after working with these guys. I can't even tell you. Eto-san kind of took him under his wing and showed him stuff, and it's just amazing. Here's Eto-san sketching out these sketches would occur after we knew what we were doing. He would draw it. You can see this dotted line is the view. This is actually going to be up on the hill that you view this from the second story of the house. And this is the dry waterfall. You can see there is water. One stone, they didn't want water through the whole thing. So there's this one stone here that's just like a seep that spills out over that stone. And this is the work for there. You see this little spot over on the right here with the moss. They went up on the roof of the house, picked the moss off, and then sodded it in on that piece of dirt. That was the other thing I loved. Nothing's a problem. Just boom, boom, boom. Everything gets done. So the moss, and they're telling us that we can grow moss. We just have to have the ground has to be kept real clean, and then the moss can grow on it. We can't have things competing with it. And we even see it in larger spaces. This is still doing fairly well. California has, for you, those of you who don't live in the area, California is not conducive to growing moss. So it's kind of neat to see it. And this is the lantern we built. We just had to go and get the top. I found the top over at American Soil, and it was done. This was another job in Oakland where the same deal. I went in and said, I can do it, but I'd love to bring these guys in, and they allowed us to do it. This was building the patio. And now this was an interesting project because I went in and said, they're Japanese guys and they do all this beautiful work, but we don't want it real Japanese, you know, we don't, but that's a funny thing. What does that mean, you know? So they came in and just, it's like, here's that wall again, this kind of wall form. This was the patio they did. The deck is built, and now the deck is built right up to the bottom of that, where you can see the bottom of the granite and you walk up the steps to the patio. This was this little grotto we made outside the back. Anyway,
Time lag on the slides.
okay. Okay, this is, it was a weird property because when you came out the back door, you went right into a bank. So we had to cut into it. My plan was to make like a grotto out of the master bedroom. They had doors going, and I was going on vacation for a week, which had already been set up. So I just show them a sketch about how I want this little grotto like outside the back door. I come back a week later and they have this done, which is, this is looking out from the, I think I have the picture of the, yeah. See, this is looking out of the master bedroom. When the start, this was 2 feet out from the door was a 4-foot high bank of soil. They cut in there. My plan was to just have a grotto with the stairs coming up to the right. They did this thing where we were going to have the water feature in the back, but they made the steps come up here. He loved the little bridge. This was old curbing material that we can buy that's granite, but very old. Makes nice little bridges and so forth. So there's a waterfall back there. And then this little area for them to come out and sit. So I come back from 1 week and this has been done. And I'm just like, well, that's what I wanted. That's more than what I wanted. Anyway, so that's, if you ever get a chance, and I'm telling you, these guys will come and work for you. There's people from Japan who will come and work for you if you invite them and you have a legitimate project to do. Eto-san and the fellows from have visas to be here for 3 years. They just had the visas renewed and have just last spring and were working on a job in Woodside up until when everybody got sent home because of the virus. So it's not, if you have projects, I really feel it would be to your advantage to try to do something like that. And it's not going to be any more expensive than it would be to hire people here who supposedly do that kind of work. So I got to tell you, and again, there was no plan other than, you know, we want a little grotto here. So anyway, I highly recommend doing it by getting people like this to work with you. It is, I can't believe how much it's done for me, for having worked with these guys, how it's improved everything. Like this moss, this is all this moss rock we use, and local people will know. People will tell you, oh, I don't like moss rock, because you'll just see these piles, you know, walls that are made with little round head-sized stones. This is the exact same stone that all those people buy and make those, you know, like walls that aren't even worth looking at. And you can see what I have, you know, what's going on here with that exact same stone. The same cages of stone that everybody else is using, they're doing work like this one. So it's just truly amazing. And I highly recommend trying to get involved, find a good project and hire some of these guys to help you. It's really an educational experience. So the main thing is they can't find plants they like. Western nurseries just, you know, grow straight trunk trees, and you can see these. They went to this little nursery out in Moraga to get all these trees that are in here. We weren't even going to put in trees. We were just going to do all the hardscaping, but Eto-san couldn't do that. So he had to go find some trees. So I told him there's this Japanese Kenny's nursery out in Moraga, and he has a bunch of old interesting stuff. That was on a Friday afternoon. Monday morning I come back, there's like 30 plants, ratty old things they found that are all twisted or gnarly in some way, and that's what they want. All the maples we got for the projects came from old bonsai people, like my buddy Randall Lee, who you'll talk to next week, who just had trees that were for bonsai but got away in a pot, and now they're all like irregular and long and lanky, and that's what they love. So anyway, and the other thing I mentioned earlier was the thing about green. Everything's green. They will not put in anything that's not. You'll see in a lot of my pictures later that I like yellow Acorus ogon. It's like got a yellow with a greenish thing, and it brightens things up and all. They use the pure green Acorus. And after being in these gardens with them and looking at it, I'm just a green guy now. because you talk about healing gardens and this kind of thing, the green is what it's got to be. It's just green. We don't, everything else kind of makes it too exciting. The green makes it just wonderful. And this is just something that has occurred to me after sitting in these gardens and looking at it. I find that really desirable. Anyway, so, and then, Peter, how are we doing? Do you want to take a break or do you want to keep going a little bit?
When
Let me
when
go
the
a little
time is
more.
right.
Okay, yeah, just a little more. So, and then Americans that I've worked for, I mentioned this project with Ron Herman that we did. And this was kind of his last big project. This is coming up on your screen in a second, I hope. There it is. Anyway, this was an old garden. It's supposedly a 100-year-old garden in Hillsborough, San Mateo. It's where you saw him making the pathways in the walk and the walls. This is where you end up once you come down the pathways into this garden. So our job, this building in the garden was from the 1915 Pan American Exposition and had been brought in and set up. It's set up actually out over the pond. And I'm sure you'll see a picture later of how it's set up. But we went in, we had to renovate all the ponds, take out all the stone, have it lined and put it back. And I'll show you that process later on. So it was great working for Ron because he basically just said, just make this place look good. We want to add 2 stream systems to link the ponds. And other than that, it's just like walk through, can we do this, 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 and this? Okay, let's do it. And it was that simple. And but we spent 18 months there doing that. This is part of that thing. The millstone pathway there was my idea because on the left, on the left, the fence with the neighbor's house is basically right there. And the path used to go around there right against the fence. But I wanted to put some big screening material in there. So instead of going around the back of the maple you can see there, we could go out around the edge of the pond. And we made that shallow so we could plant irises and so forth in there and water plants. This is another picture of that garden. So a lot of the old stuff, like this bridge that you see, we brought that in. It was just like a skinny little piece of almost flagstone-y material that had been the bridge before. And the creek system wasn't there. We made the creek into the pond. Anyway, I got to say too, the person who brought me into this was Paul Cowley from Potomac Waterworks. And Paul does did all of Ron Herman's water stuff, any ponds or stuff, including Larry Ellison's big garden in Woodside. Paul is Mr. Water Feature. So when Ron couldn't get Shigeru Namba to do the renovation on this, Paul told him that I could do the work. And it turned out that we could. And again, we're still at this job. And in fact, this job, when I first started at Merritt College with Dennis, he was the pruner at this garden, and he would talk about it. And the pond we're renovating right now is right out the back of the house. You actually walk right out into like a almost virgin redwood forest. They're very old redwoods, very large. And then there's an old little pond in the woods there. And that's what we're renovating now. But Dennis described how the woman who owned it at the time had the carpets dyed the same color as the moss that was on the ground outside amongst the redwoods. And that whole place is green, like I was talking about before. And it is so wonderful to be there. So as soon as I walked in there, I went like, oh, this is that place Dennis was talking about. Now, Dennis, as is the case with the Merritt Group, has turned this over to Dina Blackwell, and now this is her project. We're all like this wonderful family of people who just we're all just like, I know everybody in the area. If I see something pruned, I'll know who did it. If you see good work, you know who it is. We're just like a family here. It's a wonderful thing. Okay. And so also this was, let me see if I can find some more pictures of this. I apologize for this picture situation. They can't seem to keep them up here. Anyway, so also, and like I said, what did I say? Excuse me, folks, for just 1 minute. Okay, so let's just look at these and we'll take a little break. This is one of the, I told you we were working with Greg Reeves Design, and he's doing all these fences and so forth at this project. This is the Ron Herman project. You can see this basalt column they used for a fence post. We end up putting this in. This is another thing, when you learn to do this work with the rocks and the use of the tripod and all, you end up doing a lot of work at projects that nobody, those people didn't know you were going to do, but I always know I'm going to do. This one, I'll show you some. This is this waterfall we renovated. That's that same project with Ron Herman. This was built with some of these stones. We used all existing material that was on the property. There was actually like a graveyard of stones over in the woods that had been taken out of property where they built houses now that were originally part of this garden, where you could see where the creek went under the fence and went into the neighbor's yard, but no longer is. So we could reuse some, because it's a very unique stone that I'd never seen before. And it's not our typical moss rock.
Bill, this is Peter. I have to remark that this is a very California scene here. Here I'm seeing on the right-hand side of the fault line where the water flows, I'm seeing the kind of uplift that, kind of describes the Sierra Nevada mountains. On the left, it hasn't uplifted at all, but so this is very typical of our, what do they call that? A mountain and valley rift or whatever. Geology. It's so super. Everyone can see how it slants from the left corner down to the bottom right. And that used to be horizontal rock. And maybe the rock on the left is being pushed into it because California has a handful of different tectonic plates all ramming against each other in unusual ways.
Yeah.
That's tremendous.
Well, thank you. Well, the original one was pretty much, in the old days, the guys used to just place the rocks and slap some concrete around the bottom so the water would slow. They didn't care about, water, using water wisely. They had their own well on the property, and if it's leaking, who cares, right? You just keep things running, but we can't do that anymore. So this is all lined. This was all totally taken apart, lined, and put back together. So remember the fence post? The other thing about the fence post, you're going to see it in a minute. They got delivered to the other side of the garden, so they had to be physically dragged through the garden. But this isn't even difficult. And remember, you see our roller here that the stone is on? I'll explain about that later. But this is a thing my teacher Masi Mizumi made up, that he found this roller. This is invaluable for rock people. You have to get one of these or several of these. And again, one I got to say is, I didn't make anything up that I'm doing or showing you here today. This was all the tripod arrangement, the roller, everything we do, Mas taught me, or I learned from other people. None of this is unique to me. So I just got to make that clear. I'd love to take credit for it, but I can't.
There's a philosophical concept that's expressed as only he who obeys can command. So you humbly apprenticed yourself to Mas, and now look at the powers you command.
So here's that fence post being put up. And with the tripod arrangement, you can get things exactly level. It's real easy. It's nice to work with. You can see the tripods hanging the rock. So it's put into a concrete foundation with dowels in the bottom and then sunk in there. And then we can leave it there until it hardens up. So and here's this is this garden again. This is one of the stream systems we built. You can see this beautiful toyon that actually dropped down and hit that rock and went up. But again, all that was put in. This creek wasn't even there. We did that. This is the beginning of that stream. And that's those pictures for now. So I just wanted to say one more thing. Besides working with Ron Herman on a project like this, we're actually in the middle of working on a project with Mark Keene in San Francisco. And again, what a learning experience. We're doing work with imported material from Japan. It's just been another great learning experience. He's a great guy to work with. It's just been a pleasure. And he brought in Makoto Imai, who's like a joinery carpentry master. Like I know a lot, he was the teacher to a lot of people, like our friend J.R. Van Arsdale, who gave one of these presentations recently. Makoto was his teacher originally at Laney College. And again, what a wonderful people. We are in such a wonderful group of people here doing these things. He was such a pleasure to work with. But like I said, there's a copper roof that will be on the structure that he built, but the man from Japan can't come to do it. Mark can't come back from Japan. So that's all in limbo. So hopefully someday, and I'm not at leisure to show, I'm not able to show pictures of this project at this time, but hopefully at some point I'll be able to show pictures of that project. But, and again, it's the same thing. It just continuously is just this wonderful experience of learning from these people. Yeah, I can't say enough about how you need to find people you can work with and inspire you and, you know, teach you the real deal. That's the thing. I feel like I've gotten involved with the people I should be involved with, and it's just working beautifully. So.
And so, Bill, I can't tell you how many artistic, artists I meet who say they feel they're stuck in a rut and doing the same old thing.
Yeah.
Has that thought ever crossed your mind? Or?
Yeah, it does.
Oh, yeah.
Dick Austin, in fact, told me that. One time he said, don't get in a rut. Like, the 3-stone waterfall arrangement, just the 3-stone arrangement all the time. Boom, boom, boom. You get it mixed up, you got to change things. And that's what I see too. That's what's been really helpful working with these other people, is seeing their style. Like Eto-san's style of placing stones varied from Mas's. Mas would have a perfectly horizontal top, and Eto-san tips the top forward so you can actually see the top. There's little subtle things like that. But again, the more you can learn, the more you can work with people, the better off you'll be and your work will become. But yeah, that Peter's comment is, you can get the same. You can do it. You can just repeat the same thing over and over again, and you have to resist that. So anyway, maybe we should take a short break and then we can get into more about really what we're talking about here and making this thing our own.
That's a good plan. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. Everyone can go get a snack and so forth. And
I'll fix my pictures.
Yeah, maybe that'll give us some time to get all this equipment working. Okay, we're on, time is it now? It's for all purposes, it's 12 noon, so we'll reconvene at 12:10. Okay, Bill.
Okay, I guess we're back. So, can we do this on our own? Can we make our own Japanese style gardens, or how do we talk about this? Again, we're talking about a 1,000-year-old tradition that's been highly refined and just is an amazing art form. And so I guess it's a real challenge to be able to duplicate this art form in our own way. But what I always like, my motto, and what I like to read when I start my classes is You know, David Slosson's book, Secret Teachings in the Art of the Japanese Gardens. It's always been a favorite of mine as far as, I don't do a lot of reading. I like looking at pictures better. I like getting Niwa magazine and books from Japan and looking at gardens. That's my way of learning pretty much. But this is David Slosson's interpretation of the Sakuteki, which is an ancient Japanese garden manual. But this is what I always like to think about. This is the quote from the Sakuteki. You should design each part of your garden tastefully, recalling your memories of how nature presents itself for each feature. Think over the famous places of scenic beauty throughout the land and design your garden with a mood of harmony, modeling after the general air of such places. To me, that's what we got to do. And more than just the visual impact, it's that sensory impact, you know, the air of such places. And so what I'd like to, and also what I always think about when I think about that is, again, when I was a child, my father and his friends had a deer hunting camp up in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and I loved it there. And there was this place in the woods. Remember I mentioned Saihoji? There was this place on a bend in the creek that was just like a big open space that was just moss, that high tufted moss. They have moss in Pennsylvania. For you people back there, you probably realize that. And I loved that place. I wanted to go there. I wanted to lay there. I just wanted to sleep there in that moss at night. It's where I wanted to be. It still has a profound effect on me when I think about it. So there were those kinds of experiences when I was a kid. And those are that. If, you know, we're talking about the Japanese, the name, the Japanese, I guess it will always be a Japanese style garden because we are mimicking what they've done. They've spent 1,000 years perfecting this art form, and now we're trying to make it our own. So I guess we would call it a Japanese style, but it's always going to reflect the Japanese model. But anyway, that's what it was to me. There's the beech trees and maples and the hemlocks. In Pennsylvania, I could see building fantastic Japanese style gardens with the material they have, mountain laurel. My teacher Moss loved mountain laurel, but it doesn't grow real well here. And there they would look like old pieris with the magnificent trunks and the stone. You could build such beautiful gardens with all that native material back there. Also, another profound effect for me, right near my house, my buddy Lenny Steiner's place, he lived right against one of these big old estates. And we had a little path from his place that went into this little hollow where there was a spring coming out from under the roots of a tree. And it was this little hollow place. It was a giant tree with this water just pouring out from the roots that started the creek that I said earlier we'd be making dams and structures. We loved it in there. We would go in there, and in the hot summer, you would go there, you could drink the water out of there where you would never have drank water out of any creek anywhere else. But because it was this natural spring, we could drink the water. It would change throughout the seasons, you know, and in winter it would be snowy and cold and frozen, but there would still be water moving because it was pouring out of there. And that place to me was the perfect Japanese garden, not just visually, but the feel of it, the air of that place. You just wanted to be there. It's one of the most important places in my mind. Then one more thing I'd like to talk about was one time when I was with my father, and it was down right off the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia somewhere, and it was some nursery guy, and so they're talking. So I got to, you know, there's a creek. So I just start going up the creek, which is my normal procedure. And it leads up, it's all rocky, and it leads up, and there's a big house, a big estate house, like up there in the woods. But all of a sudden I come to a wall, and the creek's running out of a wall. And I realized it had been an old mill house with the old walls were there and there was still part of the floor. And originally the water would come and divert around the building and over the wheel, it would turn the wheel and then down into the creek. But over the years, the creek had broken through the wall up high, is dropping over the wall like a waterfall into the basement of that structure and then out through a hole in the wall to continue the creek. So I creep through the hole in the wall that the creek has made, and I'm inside the structure, and all of a sudden these giant carp come floating to the surface inside there, and they're big. They're like a couple feet long. The carp would get really big in those rivers. And I'll never forget that too. And I've always wanted to build a garden like that with the ruined walls and the water spilling into it and out. I just think that would be an incredible scene with that as the koi pond and so forth. So all those kinds of things, there they were. And there's no Japan involved in that. There was no Japan involved in that quote I just gave you, even though it was made up by the Japanese. The scenic places of beauty throughout the land. I could see the Japanese building gardens with a desert motif if they had seen like the Mojave Desert, because it is so visually interesting and such beautiful rock and so forth. So keep all these things in mind, all these beautiful places you've seen, and try to mimic that in your design and building gardens. So anyway, and then recently, as the picture, you're seeing the pictures on the screen, I worked with a fella from Berkeley, Robert Trachtenberg, who's with garden architecture, and he's had me do several projects with him. One that you'll see pictures later, there was a natural space up in the Napa Valley built in a natural rock outcropping. So he knew I was able to work with rock with ease. So the picture you're looking at is in a private holding in the Trinity Alps Wilderness in Northern California. It's a 600-acre parcel within the wilderness area. And my client, who you can see with the day pack, wants to be able to walk up to the lake till he's 80 years old. So it's about 1.5 miles up to the lake. You can see what it was like. In a lot of the places you were scrambling over granite and so forth, and they wanted a trail. They actually had a trail building contractor in there who started just blowing up the granite, just blew up these incredible rock outcroppings to level things, and was caught in the process, and they fired him. Said, this isn't what we were asking for. And Robert just said, Bill can do this. So we just went up with a tripod and spent 3 weeks just leveling and making runs and so forth with all this granite you can see. So the next few pictures are that same space. So here's our tripod arrangement, and this is what we use to move most rocks and set most rocks. Even if we have heavier equipment, bring them in, we'll still use the tripod. But here, you weren't going to get any heavy equipment up there. And so we just walked up the mountain with a tripod, leveling things out. We're still building that one little stairwell. You can see this stuff. I don't want to get too far into the mechanics of things today. I teach the class at Merritt that will be online, where I'll do a lot of talking about the actual physical placing of rocks and using the equipment. I think I should minimize that today. But you can see this rock. And if you notice to the right, there's a rope tied to the top of it, because the tripod will only lift something within the legs of the tripod. As soon as it goes out of the legs, the tripod falls over. So obviously when this rock slips off of that ledge there, it could swing to the outside of the tripod legs, but not with that rope. It'll swing out there and then just swing back to center. The rope won't let it fall over. So you always have that rope in either direction to correct it if something were to go wrong. So there it is hanging in the air. And what you can't see is that right on the edge of that boulder, there's another boulder down lower that forms a groove or a wedge. And this thing sat in there like a wedge to create like a crib wall along the edge of the walkway. So there it is in. And there's how that was that spot you saw in the first picture. And now you can see it's all kind of leveled out. My initial goal was to make it look completely natural, like nobody would ever know you did anything. but it turned out looking like steps in a lot of cases. But the client was happy beyond belief that we did what we did and were able to do what we would do. I would have preferred it to look slightly more natural. But you can see, and so Tim Hanskin helped us with this project, who is he edits for Zukia Living Magazine and is an authority on Japanese gardens and so forth. And we really had a good time doing this. But at one point I said to him, it's like, we're building a path through a Japanese garden. He said, yeah, Bill, exactly. Here we wanted to get a little bridge. So the boys went over there, they played around a little bit, said, oh, this will be a good one. So we pulled this thing up.
Wow.
The hole that we pulled that out of is where I want to be buried. Just put me in there and put another rock on me. So see, there was this ditch that during the wet season, there'll be a lot of water running through there, so we couldn't block it. So we made a bridge. I mean, what else would a Japanese garden builder do but build a nice Japanese garden bridge to put in there? I thought that one looked just fantastic. Here we are down fixing stuff in the lowlands. There's the creek in here. We pulled these stones out and made a little walkway across the creek. Here's some more pathways. And with the tripod, this was all material that's just laying there. Once in a while, we had to pull something down from further out, but it was all there. All this work took 3 weeks to do. You can see this up the mountain. Now, the other thing to look at here, this is our native material. This is all manzanita. There's a scrub type oak involved. But don't it looks like the tomomono pruning that you would see with azaleas or other rounded shrubs. The manzanita works great for that kind of a look in a garden. And for our native enthusiasts, we got the manzanita, the pines, and the rock. It's just a great look. So again, it's our own thing.
You should clarify the term tamamono.
Tamamono pruning is like when they do the hedges or rounded pruning on azaleas and so forth. You'll see the rounded forms. It's that kind of look, and the manzanita takes that on naturally. You'll see that all through the Sierras with pines and beautiful trees and these beautiful rounded that are almost sculpted. They won't take the shearing. You can shear them. I've seen them sheared. You want to do it minimally. You don't want to cut in hard, but it's better to do them by hand. And but you can achieve that look very nicely. And here we are building a pathway across along the edge of the creek. And you can see how we set the stones up. And again, it's all like Japanese style garden arrangement, the pathways and so forth. But again, people who walk up there aren't going to think that. I put this picture back in because you saw us setting those stones earlier. And this is the following summer. I was real concerned about the amount of work done around with these beautiful flowers, like these tiger lilies and so forth. I was concerned about the damage we were doing in those areas, but it had no effect. That's the other beauty of using the tripod. We can insert things into spaces without disrupting an existing garden very easily. But this is a nice scene. Here's another one. This had been just another low spot, and all these rocks were in here. We just sort of leveled them, pulled them up to level. This was a little thing Tim was needed something to do. We said, hey, Tim, do like a little Nobidan kind of deal here, like with the walkways, place some stones and make it look nice. And he did. That was the great thing about Tim. Again, working with people who knows what up. We had never really worked together. And we go up there, we go, Tim, do this. Boom, it's done. He knows what I'm talking about. He can just go and do it. And it was just great. This has been, it's been in now for 3 years and everything is still holding together beautifully, which was a major concern for me because, you know, with heaving, they get 20 feet of snow up there in the winter. With heaving and freezing, you worry about, you know, rock being displaced, but nothing has moved. It's been really quite great. So here I have some pictures of rocks and how they were placed. But again, because of our time frame today and all, I'm going to let this go. Everybody who's here can go to the Merit site. It's going to be, I believe it's later in October or November, is my Placing Rocks in the Landscape class, where we'll spend 3 hours just discussing the aesthetics of placing rocks. So I would like to try to have you join me at that point.
And the URL's in the chat box, courtesy of Barb Eaton.
Good. So, but these are what we're looking at. These are the forces and what we're thinking about when we're talking about rocks, but we're not thinking about heaven and so forth. We're talking about the tension created by trying to leave Earth and move in a vertical direction and fighting gravity, which causes tension. The Earth, or stability, serenity from a horizontal line, which is sitting flat on the Earth, is more serene than a rock moving in a vertical direction. And man is motion, the diagonal line creating motion. You can see these too, and this is how we frame a scene. You see, it's ambiguous when a rock is by itself and flat, but you stop one end, the energy moves out the other way. The same with trees. And this is how we would set up a garden to make the rocks move and push your vision in the direction we want you to move. That's why we would create tree limbs like this as well. And here's David Slauson's book, which is very helpful, and you can get a lot of great ideas. Mark Keane has some great books too regarding these kind of topics. But again, reading it is one thing. You've got to get involved and try to do it yourself. Now here's a Monterey pine. This is one of our own native pines. Barbara Eaton is working on this. My good friend Bruce Thompson had started this and got me in to do the garden for these people many years ago. This tree had been there forever. Before I even got involved in all this, I used to see this tree with what we call poodle balls, little rounded sheared ends, and they've reconstructed it to be quite beautiful. But this is using our native material for pines rather than using and there's pines all over the country that are good to use. And we can talk about, in my pine pruning class, we discuss all the different types of pines. This is a pine I just received that somebody didn't want. It's a Monterey, it's a bishop pine, I believe. But look at the style of that tree. It's wild. And in some garden, it will look really great. These are pitch pines coming. This is from Pennsylvania. And look at what they look like. They could be in a Japanese garden. You just clean it up a little bit. These are amazing pines. My brother took me to this place. Every one of them looks like it could be dug up and put into a garden. This is one of our bishop pines from the North Coast. That has a bit of character. And I feel like, there's all kinds of stuff that we could use that is our own, that has the same kind of an aesthetic that we're looking for. This is a bishop pine as well. The interesting thing though, for California and Japan, I always love this, is that in Japan, they like all the plants that are very long lived, And here in California, all these plants, these native plants that are in the coastal regions are meant to be burnt down like regularly. So it's so interesting because even the Monterey, they won't even live that long because they should burn down. They don't even drop seed unless they're burned. They're called closed cone pines and will not seed until there's a fire. And when the fire comes, it cleans all the old ones out. They drop their seed, it's clean ground. All the new ones come up and create these intensely thick forests of young trees until they all sort it out and somebody wins out over the others. Now this is a bishop or Monterey pine that was in the bonsai collection garden that we've been working on over the years. And you can see that's quite a spectacular tree too. So we have, this is a little, I just took this the other day, it's a friend's place. And this is a little ponderosa pine that I gave them. And ponderosa pines are fantastic. I've seen ones that are just so beautiful. You don't treat them like you would a black pine. All the pines have a different thing that you do. Most all pines are the same in the fall when we do the thinning and pulling needles. But throughout the year, there's different things that certain trees will take. So we can, when I talk about the pine class also, we can get into that more. But the ponderosa pine is from higher elevations, but does really well here. And I've seen really beautiful ones. This is a picture from the next one coming is a picture from Niwa magazine. And you see the little picture down to the left is a picture I took in Trinity County when I was hiking. And I got the issue of Niwa and I'm looking through it and I see this picture, which is a garden in Japan. And my picture, I go, I have a picture that looks just like that. Do you see what I mean? It's even like a lot of the same material. There's even azaleas in the Trinity Alps. There's maidenhair ferns and other things. So it's just really fascinating to see that replicating nature. And that happened regularly in Niwa, where I'd have pictures of certain formations and all of a sudden there's some picture that looks like it. Niwa magazine, for you who are not familiar with it, has become quite Western over the years, more Westernized than the older that showed more Japanese style gardens. But oh my God, I would just every 2 months when I would get it, I just could not believe the gardens. You know, it's like stuff you don't see when you go to Japan. You know, it's more modern stuff, and you should get buy some old issues, back issues of Niwa. You'll just love it. So as far as native gardens, here's a garden I did with my friend Robert, who got me to do the thing in the Trinity Alps that we were just looking at. This was a house that was built in a natural rock outcropping up on the Silverado Trail in the Napa Valley, it's in St. Helena. And for me, the trick was not messing it up. As far as doing native Japanese gardens with our plant material, when you see all the young stuff and you put in a bunch of rocks and, oh, maybe this is going to take too long. And this was like the natural Japanese garden already. All we had to do was rearrange a few things to be able to walk through it and not mess it up. There were little meadows up above with beautiful trees. The hot tub was up against giant rock outcrops that had ancient manzanitas growing, with the dead wood and the beautiful bark. I was like, well, this is what it would look like. So this is just a little bit of a taste of it. So you see this pathway that's coming. We had to pull this center stone out to go through there, and we used it somewhere else. And all this stone is Napa basalt, which always fissures on a straight line. So one side of the rock will always have a flat side. So a lot of these path stones you see were boulders that were just turned over to the flat side and reused like that. Also, do you see the ferns growing out of these rocks and the moss? In the summer, that all goes dormant. It is not even visible. And as soon as it rains, all the little ferns start coming back out of the rock. It's smooth rock surface. It's a deciduous fern that's native to California. Nobody's ever given me the real name of it. But it grows around a lot. This was another pathway we made there. You can see all the native stone. All the stone was on the property. And this was the deck. The home looks out over the Napa Valley. This was a boulder we had taken from around the back end and brought onto the patio and set it up. I wish I had a better picture of it. It's quite a beautiful boulder. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm going to start. Sorry about the lack of time. Okay, I'm going to show you more pictures. I'm going to let a little of this slide. As far as the gardens though, with native or Japanese plants, that's up to you. I love doing gardens that we use black pines, maples, azaleas, all of that. And they do really well here. The azaleas in California are, sort of okay. But pines, maples, all that kind of camellias are just beautiful. We have beautiful plants. Or you can go the native route. That's completely up to you. And I believe either way is just great. I'd like to show you some more pictures now of gardens in the time we have left. This is a garden, I told you, the one we did with Ron Herman that you saw the pictures. This was the garden that was right across the street. And again, like with Ron's, I worked with Paul Calley on this. Paul does all the plumbing and all the design of the plumbing systems and filtration and all that for these ponds. And we do the pretty work and fix it up. So here's taking this apart. This is the Lilienthal estate in Hillsborough. Here's what it looked like when we got there. We were in the process of taking this apart. You can see the mud that was in the bottom. That's 60 years of sludge. We had a pump truck take 8 loads of that stuff out. And the property's so big that we just spewed it out all over the property because it was full of dead fish and mud and pure silken mud that fertilized everything beautifully. You can see the old bridge and these posts that we took out along this edge were posts that were made to be, that are concrete, that were made to be look like log edging. And I think they made a bunch of them and used them, but you can see all the other stone around it is San Francisco cobbles that were on ships that were readily available. I think they got tired of making concrete posts and just went with the ballast stone here, the cobbles, because they put a lot in, but we had to remove all the cobbles so that it could be lined and then put back. And that's Paul standing on the thing saying, boy, I'm glad I don't have to get involved with that. Here's taking it apart. We had to pull all the old rocks out of the old shell so it could be lined. This is our guy, Paul. I got 2 Pauls. This is a liner Paul, and then there's filtration Paul, who you saw a minute ago standing on the bridge. But you can see we put this, you shoot a line all the way around the pond and put bender board in. He puts a fabric up on the bender board and then he shoots it with this material, which is called polyurea. And it comes out like bed liner on your truck. So it's much easier to work on than just any rubber liner. I would never, ever build a pond of this magnitude with a rubber liner. No way, especially with the extensive rock work. Anyway, and Paul here, anybody can get in touch with me. I can put you in touch with Paul. Again, another incredibly great guy to work with who loves what we're doing. We've done at least 7 of these ponds together now, and they've all been just the best thing ever. So here are the boys putting those fake logs back in. You notice there's space behind it because it'll be filled with some concrete and then planting medium for plantings along the edge, because the liner, it'll be filled with like pea gravel, and then you won't see any of the liner and we'll plant it. This is the little waterfall you'll see later being put together. This was a waterfall and a stream system that enters the pond. So the old bridge, because we were working across the street with Greg Reeves from the joinery carpentry guy, we brought him over here. He redid the bridge and a bunch of fences. Again, it's just so nice to have this whole group of people to work together. So here we are putting it back together again. You can see all the parts that have already been put back together. And this is my daughter fixing a little beach area. We got her down there for a few days when she had nothing to do to make a little beach. And this is fixing the stepping stones in the creek. I think you'll see some more of this later. Here's more of it getting put together. The pond's about, it's 5,000 square feet, the actual pond. And again, this was a real old garden that was done like originally like 100 years ago, and then an additional part done about 60 years ago. So here's the polyurea liner, and here's us, my roller, putting a rock in. We found this rock that had this perfect bowl-like top to make a spillway. It had actually been under a rock in the pond as a support for that other rock. You can see we have stainless steel pins in concrete behind the wall too to attach this stuff to. And he waterproofs all that. And this is putting the waterfall back together. This is planting with lily pads and so forth. You can see the waterfalls running in the back now, the pond's being filled up. And this is that waterfall you just saw us putting together. And again, this was all done with rock that was already there. We didn't bring anything new in. So it was like having to use what they had. And it came out okay. This is Greg finished the bridge. You can see the new bridge. You can see the bridge on the left, though, is a natural stone that is so cool. It's totally rectangular, thick, and huge. And I don't think it was worked. But again, every bit of this had to be taken apart and put back together. And this is more of it. That's the house.
We got serious time lag here.
Oh,
And signal strength is kind of weak. Here we go. Here's the
okay.
house.
And this is, again, this is part of it. We're planting all the edges. This was that little stream crossing you saw. And remember I said before how I like the golden, this Acorus ogon I mentioned to you about the green garden, and this Eto-san and my friends, they didn't want no, they didn't want this stuff. They used the green Acorus. It would look the same, but it would be totally green and not yellow. And that's how my gardens will be from now on, I'm afraid, or happy to say, whichever. Anyway, this is that little waterfall you saw putting together. And again, you see my glaring yellow Acorus ogon. But the Acorus is great though, because you can put it right in the water. You can plant it right in the water, which is really nice for long streams. Plus the way it fans out so nicely from the stones is wonderful. This is one of my gardens in Orinda. When I got to this garden, it had been a garden that Henry Masatani had built. He did the waterfall inside and some of the plantings, and then there was just random stuff that had never been done, which I came in and started doing. I did all the stepping stones, and this boulder you see by the gate was there, but there was no boulder. I put the boulder in, then we bought the pine, but the pine was only as tall as the top of the gate. So I grew the top and grew the branch out over the gate, which is something you see more in Japan at an entry. And I always liked that kind of look, but they have a lot of pines. He has like 14 pines on the property. And now these are just some of my gardens that I'd like to show you for a few minutes, and then maybe we can have some questions if people would like. This is a garden I do. And again, this is one now that Dina Blackwell is pruning. That's the other great thing about my teaching at Murray College. I know everybody who can prune, because as everybody knows, you might as well not even build a Japanese garden unless you have people who can do quality maintenance. You have to have people who can prune. Like this garden is in Oakland. It's a very small, intimate garden that I just love. And Barbara Eaton's pruning it now, but Bruce Thompson had originally done it. And I hadn't seen it for 2 years after I built it. And Bruce had just done beautiful work. And I went in after 2 years, and it was stunning to me how much better it was with that quality pruning and how it had filled in. I was just stunned by it, even though I always loved it and I loved what I did. But the pruning just, I mean, it just brings it out. And the maintenance, I cannot talk about maintenance enough, how important maintenance is. And again, this 1,000-year-old tradition of Japanese gardens, pruning is done at a, at an artistic level. These are the kind of things we need to do more. The maintenance is the most important thing of the whole garden, not just the fancy trees. So it takes some real expertise to do this properly.
It said a garden is just born when it's built.
Exactly.
And then it has to be fostered to reach maturity.
Right.
Well, we're going to hear all about that next week.
Yeah, and things will change. Trees will be replaced. Things will be moved around. It's a living thing. This is a garden we did up in St. Helena. But again, the person wanted a naturalistic garden, and I think we did a good job of that. The plantings on the left, sort of the small leaf thing you can see on the left, is potentilla, which grows up in the Trinity Alps, where you saw my pictures of, on lake edges. It's just beautiful. It gets old woody trunks and has beautiful flowers, so I use that in there as part of that. This is a little wall we built with these basalt column cuts. This is scrap material that you see making the wall, that they cut off big columns like the one you see laying in front. But my rock dealer, they get columns like this that are 20 feet long and 6 feet in diameter. And they'll cut off these pieces of the crust. And we use them for stairways and walls and all kinds of interesting things. But with the tripod, you're able to do this stuff really easily, setting things up like this. This is a more modern garden we did years ago. This is a garden we did. This had been an old garden that we renovated, and we built this waterfall. The pines were there, but there was an old waterfall there that was just a wreck. In the old days, the guys would just build them and put in some concrete, and then they would leak. The pond would normally hold water, but the waterfalls always leaked. So we made a nice little waterfall for them. This is another like woodland type garden in Mill Valley. This old piece of granite you can see is that curbing material that we can buy. It comes from those curbs in San Francisco and a lot of other cities were just cut granite. And when they redo the streets, they'll tear them out. And a lot of them are really nice for using for things like that. This is a garden that I just love. It's out in Martinez, and it's a little native garden. We use black pines, but this blue fescue is native to the Sierras, and it's all manzanita. You see how that pretty manzanita is? And you know why this looks so pretty? Because these clients are meticulously out there picking at it. It looks beautiful every time I go there. It is so beautiful. Dina does these pines as well now, and I guess Dina does a lot of my stuff, huh? Mm-hmm. There are other people who prune my stuff, but again, it's just wonderful having all these people that I can get to do my work. This is a wall, like after we worked with Eto-san, we started building walls like this that are just way more interesting and a better use of our material. This was a big naturalistic garden up in Oakland. This was it filling in. You can see these old tree stumps that we left in. We had pulled them out of the grate when we were grading. It was an old Monterey pine that was down, and we pulled the root stumps out and used them. And this is
sculptural.
This is a more this is the garden with the patio, and the house is right from where you're looking, and so this was right after it was finished. And this is a water feature we did. We made it like a spring. The water emerges from under this beautiful stone, this arch stone I found, and flows through into a sump.
Bill, that previous slide, looking from the house over the patio, looks like Connecticut bluestone.
Yeah.
It looks like a frozen pond.
I never thought about that. Yeah. But I'm very happy with this garden.
That don't happen too often in the Bay Area.
This was a garden that I did with Dick Austin many, many years ago, where we used all native plants. You see the red buds in bloom. There are blue oak forests. Those are blue oaks over on the other side. And then garrias and oaks and coffeeberry, red bud, heucheras, our native heucheras, all that type of material. And this is getting better over time. But again, all this material, our native material that you see here, should be burned down every 10 to 15 years. And we're getting a lot of it burnt down this year, but that's the nature of this material. And then, so like when the red buds get too big and start to fail, you just cut them off at the roots, cut them off at the base, and a whole new tree will pop up almost to the size you already had within a year or two. So that's what you got to do every few years. But there's a lot of replacements of native native plant material. You're going to have to replace coffee berries and this kind of stuff from time to time. This is just a little water feature in the garden. This is a garden that Randall prunes, and you get to hear him talk about it next week. You'll probably see some pictures. This is that garden in Martinez, again, that I said that people do such a beautiful job. They just keep, this is a low ground cover manzanita. And you see how nice it looks like amongst things like that. And again, they just keep such beautiful care of it. This was this real modern thing I did for this, this Japanese lady, Japanese American lady. She wanted something really modern. And so this was my interpretation of that, using basalt column pieces. And this is a little garden we did in San Francisco for an old bonsai friend who unfortunately passed away. I really like this garden. Another little water feature, and more of that yellow chorus. Even the ligularia that you see behind there with the variegated white and green leaf, the Japanese guys love that, but they use the green one, totally green. We love these variegated ones, but they used it in that Mill Valley job, if you notice, but it was all green. These are some of our attempts at Nobidan construction, pathways with stone. And again, this is that cut off Napa, the scrap basalt column pieces. Okay, and this is one more little garden in San Francisco we did years ago. And again, Paul, the polyurea guy, did the liner for this pond. Again, I would never do a pond like this with one of those rubber liners with this kind of rock work on top. But I love this garden. And again, this is high maintenance of this garden. They keep it really nice. These are just some other rock arrangements we've done. This was a native garden too. This is all native material except for the pyrocanthus right in your face. Here's another. And this is a head of a rock, head of a dry waterfall that I really like. This is a garden that Randall prunes. You hear Randall talk about it next week. This is an old garden in up in Granite Bay that Mr. Saito, who was a living treasure of Japan, the man who wrote The Magic of Trees and Stones, he designed this garden for our client when he was 93 years old. He also built a garden in Hillsborough for Ben Ichinose that a lot of the people in our area are familiar with. But you see the swimming pool was built like a lake, but you see the waterfall. We replaced that pine on the top, that one, well, it looks fairly small in the distance there, but we had to do that. And I did her pine pruning for years, and they recently sold the property. Mm. And this is my attempt at a little good desert vision, the Spanish type home. You see that's a manzanita. I don't know who was pruning that. It's a little squarish, but you could make that look a lot nicer. That one in the right corner there, that tree, is a manzanita of some type and really fits the bill well. But again, I'm quite sure the Japanese would have done desert scenes if they had had deserts like we do. And this is a job in one of my favorite gardens out in Walnut Creek. This is that garden again. And this has been a continuous work in progress, but it's really gotten quite great. Leslie Buck does a lot of the pruning here. But again, there's my yellow chorus. You see how good it would look if it was green? Mm-hmm. Here's a few of my bonsai. I had to just throw that in. Wisteria. The black pine that you see, I planted that from seed the first night I went to Murray College. They had seed that Dennis had from Japan, and we were doing these, actually making root cuttings, taking a seedling and making a cutting out of it to make a better bonsai. That can be explained at another time as well. Mm-hmm. But so this tree now is 29 years old, and it reflects my advancing from there to here. This is another one. The little pine on top there too is from that same batch. It's a little shohin size, under 20 centimeter Japanese black pine. A little cherry down in the bottom is a spring show. And this is one of my last pictures. So I think we're through the slideshow. There's one more. This is a little garden in Alameda that Randall will talk about next week. This is one of my favorite gardens too. And here, this was another desert picture. This client wanted something between Sedona, Arizona, and Kyoto. So we went more Sedona, I think. This is called Mexican fire granite. It's beautiful stone. Anyway, that's the end of my slideshow. And I think we're running out of time here. If anybody has a quick question.
Well, matter of fact, we have some questions in the Q&A function.
Okay.
I'd encourage everybody just to type your question in there, and either I'll read it out loud, or I think I can put you on live. You can answer it yourself. So front of the line is Nancy Olson. And let's see if we can get Nancy on the microphone. Oh, okay. Well, anyway, Nancy asks, any thoughts on barrier or boundary stones such as Tomei Ishi or Sekimori Ishi? I'd like to learn how to knot and tie these. Thanks. Do you know the little rock that's tied up like a parcel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I learned the hard way that means don't go here.
Right. I have people who use them in their gardens. They like them for their ornamental look, or they'll actually use them to keep people from walking a certain way, except most Westerners don't know what that means. Right, Peter?
Oh, yeah.
So, but they are neat, and tying them. I'm no expert on tying anything. As I mentioned before, my expertise are stones and trees. All that other, we've made them and I've tied them in my own way, but that's not something I'm expert at. When I was at Kinkakuji, we spent a day doing the fences at Kinkakuji, the Kinkakuji bamboo fences, and tying the knots. That's the hardest thing I've ever done, is getting that knot procedure down and doing it. And my hands were dyed black for 6 months after I returned from Japan from doing that. But anyway. Something else?
Yeah, Sakia Living Magazine occasionally has bamboo fence workshops,
Yeah.
usually set up at the nursery in New Hampshire, Shinboku Nursery. They have a whole lineup of recurring workshops. Let me see now. Oh, looky here, participant, I'm sorry for quoting all the names. Participant Lara had the website for the Moraga Garden Center. It's just moragagarden.com.
Yeah, it's a great little nursery. Kenny, the owner, is Japanese American, and you just, it's one of those places where I go in and you find something that's appropriate for the kinds of gardens we do.
Here's an anonymous attendee responding to a slide. I'm always surprised when I see a tori, that's a Shinto style gate, used in a garden without a shrine. This is a gate that marks the entry to the sacred precincts of a shrine. Was that gate already there? And how do you feel about mixing in sacred elements?
That's a great question. Yeah, the client had the gate made. I agree. It is a Shinto thing. It really doesn't have a place in the garden like that. He's not a Shinto. It's not a Shinto shrine. You're not really entering a sacred place. It's a garden. I think that those kinds of things should be kept separate. Americans, one of the biggest problems for me is how much stuff Americans have to add in. They feel they need to add in all kinds, the Torii gate, they need lanterns, they need everything, and I see that happening in public gardens I work at, where it's just out of control. And again, I just sit back and think of my little spring in the woods and think that's how it should be. So I wouldn't do that. In fact, the job I'm working on with Mark Keene right now, the owner wanted a Shinto shrine, and Mark said, "You're not a Shinto, and I'm not doing, and I'm not building a shrine. And if you want somebody else to do it, you can get them to do it, but I'm not doing it." So, and that client too wanted a lot of things added in that aren't necessarily, that we wouldn't necessarily really want in the garden. I hope that helps.
Oh yeah, that's a fascinating topic.
I think when we're talking about making this our own, a lot of those kinds of things aren't our own. That makes sense to people who are Japanese and are in the appropriate places. But we got to kind of make that natural thing our own and not, use things that are specifically Japanese to explain things are, I don't know if I'm saying this right. We need to adapt it to our own things. Like all that stuff is Japanese, you know. Is that necessary in our gardens? Anything else, Peter?
Oh yeah, we got more here. Steve asks, what do you do about gophers and ground squirrels pushing dirt into rock streams, meaning dry water feature streams?
Oh, God.
Shop
You get
vac?
an exterminator. It's a brutal problem. I mean, we try to put wire behind a lot of things at this point because it's everywhere in our environment. Ground squirrels, the big job you saw, the native garden I mentioned, he has an exterminator that's out there all the time. There's ground squirrels, gophers, just everything. So you're constantly battling with nature in a lot of ways as far as that stuff is concerned. I have no magic solutions for that. You know, I wish everything just wouldn't be. I love seeing things in the garden, but those kinds of things are very disruptive and very problematic, and I have no magic solutions.
Style on down here. Huh. Well, that appears to be all the stuff in the Q&A box.
Thanks, Bill Castellon, for an amazing presentation. You rock. Thanks to the original webinar audience for their provocative questions and shared knowledge. The conversation afforded the chance to imbibe the lecture information and form connections with like-minded people. Thanks to the Japanese people who, over generations, developed the life and living environment that is the subject of these webinars, and who've generously shared this gift with the world. Thanks to the many artists, craftsmen, scholars, and organizations worldwide and here in the USA who've made this known, notably the North American Japanese Garden Association, Bonsai and Suiseki clubs, Japan-US Sister City Associations, and thanks to the Tsukiya Living magazine. Tsukiya Living magazine, which shows and tells how this living environment's intangible essence may be realized all over the world with a diversity of tangible materials and forms not necessarily Japanese on their surface. Tsukiya Living magazine has universalized it as the Tsukiya Living environment. Thanks again to the Japan Foundation Center for Global You can tell I'm in a hurry. Thanks again to the Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership for financial support, and to the Oakland Fukuoka Sister City Association for producing these webinars. We invite you to view other recorded webinars in the Japanese style living environment webinar series. Thank you, and see you next time.